Thanks very much. Thank you, Kate, for that. And welcome to SO101. I'm Susan Basterfield. I know some of you it's the first time meeting, so it feels like a great privilege. I'm very happy to have been part of the DNA team within Consensus since August. This is the fourth cohort of SO101. Myself and my team were invited in to help the mesh explore in practice from community to community what it's like to actually start to build our muscles around self-organizing from the perspective of what we need to do internally to change our mindset in order to be able to do this in a way that's generative, healthy, and efficient. And I'm really excited that Consensus 2.0 is being seen by Joe and the rest of the mesh for our opportunity to really start to do this properly. So I feel like this is the absolute right time where we can start to put some scaffolding around our intention for being self-organized and self-managed in a way that is safe, makes sense, and actually makes the mesh operate the way that we know that we can, and to unleash that latent potential that seems to be just bubbling under when it comes to understanding what our opportunities are to step into our potential around self-governance, around making and keeping commitments, and around our accountability to ourselves, to our teams, to our spokes or hubs, and to the mesh itself. So I'm very, very excited. I bring with me about 25 years of experience in big multinationals like IBM and British Petroleum and Vodafone, where I spent too many years, I'd like to say I'm a slow learner, having influence over the silo for which I was responsible, making small little interventions as an entrepreneur in what I always sensed was possible when teams of people come together with intentionality. But that continued to bump up against an intransigent infrastructure that didn't want that way of working. About 5 years ago, I discovered this band of amazing social entrepreneurs in Wellington called Inspiral, and have been working within the Inspiral ecosystem in various iterations with various, and building various companies and interventions to help organizations. For the last 3 years, I've probably done, I don't know, 500,000 kilometers in the last 3 years or more. I've been to all the continents except Antarctica, working with dozens of companies and literally thousands of humans, helping to start to unlock both the very initial parts of what self-organizing can be, and literally helping leaders that know that they want to leave a legacy of something that's better, and that doesn't mean replacing them on top of the pyramid. So I'm super excited to be here. What we've seen so far has been amazing, and I think this is the right time and we're in the right place. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Susan. Mary, could you say who you are and why you're here?
I can. I won't top that. But however, hi everyone, I'm Mary O'Keefe. I'm an Irish lady living in Wellington in New Zealand, where I moved in 2004 when I was 30 years of age. My background is very much in team coaching, training, facilitating, specifically sort of in agile practices. I also am part of a worker-owned cooperative called Lumio. We're part of the Inspiral network. And we are New Zealand's only worker-owned cooperative. So practices around self-management are very important to us on the Lumio team. We've always been quite small. And it's we've sort of really strived to sort of have as flat as possible, bossless structure. I'm super excited to be here today, very much in a learning capacity. And that's all I'm going to say for now. I'm going to keep it brief and short.
Thank you, Mary. And just a quick note that Lumio is an amazing decentralized or distributed decision-making software that we will touch on in week 3. So thanks for all your work there, Mary. Okay, we're going to do what we call a check-in with all of you after we quickly do an introduction of some content, and I'll go into more about what a check-in is then. I'm going to share my screen just to give us some structure. Okay, I should probably make this full size. Yeah. Okay, we'll jump out of this in a minute because sometimes it's a bit annoying to not be able to, I don't like not seeing people's faces. No. We're going to just do a quick overview. The only thing is that, okay, how do I move this? Okay, I'll put you right down the bottom. So this week, week 1, and I'm not sure how many people, we sent it out a bit late, so my apologies for that, the reader. There was quite a bit in there, but it's about accountability and commitments, particularly, as you'll have seen, focusing on agreements and social contracts, which we're going to go into in the content part of this, this 2 hours, rhythm and cadence, and roles. And our guest today, Paul Messer from Percolab, is a particular expert on that role component. So we're going to have 40-ish minutes with him asking questions. So do feel free. We're going to enable some questions to him in that time from you if you have them. So week 2 it's called Building Our Capacity to Collaborate. So we're probably going to have a bit of time tidying up some loose ends from week 1 because it is very content heavy. But the rest of week 2 is going into some more of the theory that sits behind this practice of self-organization, looking at some theory from behavioral psychology called transactional analysis, which involves shifting from what was kind of a parent-child relationship in the kind of pyramidal top-down command and control structure to more of an adult-to-adult relationship. So we'll talk through that as well as a bit on listening and communication, which is one of the essential pillars for the individual work in self-organization. So in week 3, it will be all about distributed decision-making, going through 9 different types of decision-making processes that you can use and adopt, and some supporting tools and practices and technology to support that. We'll have a guest in that week, an expert in decision-making. Week 4 is a very practical week, and it's about prototyping and deploying something that captures, what you're learning about self-organization to be used in the mesh. So I'll share with you in that week some of the prototypes that have already been created. And so we've got things like we've got a website that's hosting a lot of the prototypes that other people have made. We've got an alumni group that's going to start meeting on their own and kind of taking forward some of the opportunities and challenges that you are all having as you try to take self-organization back out to the mesh. So we'll have a guest from one of the other cohorts as our kind of prototyping expert there. And the week 5 is about the self. So we've gone really wide on a lot of tools and practices and very theory as well. And week 5 is really coming back to the self and self-organization, which is a really key component. And we'll have an amazing guest in that week as well, and we'll do a bit of feedback. Why can't I? Okay, I need to click this. So that's just that in a bit more detail, and we'll be sharing these slides with you after the call, so you can have a bit more of a look. So this just gives you a bit more content there and kind of some information around what problems that we heard. We did about 80 interviews with people in the mesh before we got going, designing and adapting the content, which is from a public offering of a similar course, but we adapted it to some of the key opportunities that we heard about in the mesh. So that's a bit more information there. I'll keep going. Quite hard to do all this controlling things. So the weekly flow, Mondays, we do a brief overview of the week and we check in. We go into the content and we have some presentation and info from me, Susan, and Mary. We'll always do some kind of participatory exercise, and that's going to be a key learning opportunity for you as well to understand how we can utilize and maximize online meetings to actually go deeper in different kind of constellations and really use participatory exercises there. We'll have a guest in week 1, week 3, and week 5 to go further into their expertise, which is always matched to the content for that week. We'll quickly spend time talking about the team and individual assignments, and we'll check out. That's all in 2 hours. Whew. Friday is very fast paced. It's a check-in, a reflection on the week's. This should be an apostrophe there. The week's content and insights, and sharing of team assignments, giving feedback, and then checking out. So our expectations of you, and we tried to convey this quite strongly before you signed up. So around the hours needed per week. There's a Google Drive folder that you can submit your team assignments into. We kind of expect you to discuss this in your own time in your teams. Susan's going to just quickly talk about a bit more about the teams in a minute, and organize on how you'll present your team assignments for Friday. Individual assignments, this is really up to you. We're not going to be checking in or checking out. This is a course about self-organization, and our kind of fundamental belief is that you kind of get out of this what you put into it. So the individual assignments, please submit them to the group folder, discuss in your team meetings, and also feel free to discuss with me in office hours if you can attend. And I'll just have a quick show of hands at the end around setting up the best time for office hours. And this is just going to be 90 minutes on like a maybe Wednesday or Thursday, where you can feel free to drop in and have a chat to me about anything that's going on, or some weeks we might have a little bit more of a theme in office hours. So we'll communicate a bit more about that in the Slack. Readings. So there's always a lot of readings and content, and we ask that you do what is in the essential readings category and before the call, and we'll get the reader to you usually on Thursday. And the rest of the readings throughout the week, if you can, readings and videos and podcasts. I'm going to stop for questions at the end. I'll stop sharing now. And I'll ask Susan to, in a minute, to talk a bit more about the teams. Does anyone have any comments or questions just on that? Oh, great. We're all very clear. So we'll put those slides in the Slack, and if things do come up as being confusing, please just mention it. It's really, we're always open for feedback. If an assignment doesn't make sense, or what's essential reading and what's not is not clear, it's all feedback. So always raise your hand. Susan, can you talk quickly about teams, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So an intrinsic part of this experience is that it's not just about Kate or I or Mary or our guests kind of teaching you about what self-organizing is and self-management is. The most important part, or equally important part of this, is that every week you will have team assignments. And not only are they team assignments that some of you might find challenging because the description might be fairly loose and the outcome and output might be fairly ill-defined. So the opportunity to actually come together and create what you can only create together as a collective is a very important experiential component. And every week you will be assigned in a group of, there will be 4 teams, 3 teams of 4, 3 teams of 5, 1 group of 4, and it will be up to you to self-organize how you meet. So when you Zoom, how you produce your output, when you publish, what do you want to share, how you organize to share on the Friday. There is the weekly teams sheet in the Google Drive. I'll just quickly share with you what your teams are this week. We like to name the teams after fun things like trees. So Team Totora is Akila, Brett, Frank, Pooja, Priyanka. Pooja is not here, so in the case that you have a team member that doesn't attend, it's really up to the team to fill that person in, get them up to speed, and include them in what you decide to do moving forward in terms of meeting and producing something that's shippable by the end of the week. The other thing that teams do is it's a place for you to review your individual work. And I'm thinking now, and we always go back and forth on this, that we will be staying in the same teams for week 1 and 2 and 5, and that we might mix it up for weeks 3 and 4. Any questions on teams?
Cool. We're doing all right for time, Susan. and Mary, about 3 minutes behind. It's one of my key performance indicators, being a good timekeeper. Okay, so I just wanted to quickly jump back into the slides and we've got some good comments in the chat as well. So do you want to just quickly talk to that, Jim? I mean, I can say it for you. There's a comment in the chat around.
He's unmuted.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah, how do you mean? Yeah, I think it was just basically my misconfusion or my misperception. I wasn't realized that you guys were looking for participants. I was here basically just to follow along and lurk and to find out. I'm certainly much willing to help out, be part of a team and stuff like that. It just wasn't my assumption going into it.
Yeah, that's good to hear that there was perhaps a miscommunication there. And yeah, it's great to have you here. And I think based on your obvious experiences driving an SO in various organizations, projects, and communities, that could be really great to have you in those teams as well, and especially in the prototyping week. So we'll just keep communicating on that.
Yeah, definitely, for sure.
Thank you, Jim. Cool. Okay, so back to the slides quickly, and we're going to go into one last slide, and then I think we should do a check-in now, actually, and we'll do the rest of the presentation on content before our guest comes in. Cool. So the only other slide I wanted to, to talk about is this one here. So our kind of approach with this training, and in terms of how we work with organizations, is to break kind of our content and our approach down across what we call the self-organization onion. I don't know if any of you have seen the Agile Onion, but this is our riff on that, which is to say that it's really important. The top kind of layer of the onion is tools and processes, and these are kind of the technology, which is, you know, software, digital or not, that we can rely on or that we can use to scaffold the rest of the layers. And that might be something like a social contract or a role exercises or a Trello or Lumio, decision-making software. So these tools and processes are one level. There's practices that make up that next level. And this is, intentional continuous habits or rituals that kind of help us with the other two layers, which are principles. So what are our principles and how are we thinking about them? So what's guiding us in terms of how we practice self-organization and the tools and processes that we use? And also our mindset or way of being, which is a really, really important part of self-organization that often, in my experience, and I realize I didn't really do an introduction, but I've worked for a couple of companies in my early career before the last kind of 5 or 6 years have been working in a self kind of organized entrepreneurial way. But the mindset or the way of being is something that when I look around the organizations we're working with, is essential at that individual level. We really need to start interrogating what we're bringing to a team or a spoke or an organization, our triggers, our ego work, in order to really truly cooperate with people and to reach the level of communication and the level of trust that's necessary in self-organization. This inner circle is fundamental. And so that will be kind of an ongoing or a foundational kind of point of this course that we will spend all of week 5 kind of talking about. So with that, I want to go into checking in. Unless there's any comments or questions on that Agile, that self-organization onion. Okay, so the check-in is one of the kind of micro practices that we really we see as quite essential for self-organization. It's very small, and it's kind of absolutely fundamental for at least how I know that Susan, Mary, and I operate. Basically, it's any time in an engagement, and by that I mean a meeting, any kind of meeting, or an in-person kind of away day or retreat, or kind of a longer engagement, maybe not in a stand-up. Anytime that starts, we always take a few minutes at the beginning to just really check in with how we are in that moment, or we use a check-in question designed to kind of like bring forth our perspectives on the meeting or on our kind of state. And what this does is it really enables us to be present, to arrive, to get stuff that is essential off our chest or out of our head and into the middle, into the group. And we find that once that's done, we've actually got a lot more capacity to go into difficult conversations, to bring forth really, really important insights, to have better, more robust, more trusting meetings. So the check-in is kind of like, if there's one thing that I personally think is the foundational starting point of self-organization, it's that. So today we're just going to ask you the check-in question. Just your name, just a little bit of an intro on top of it as well. Your name, your team, and what is your intention for this training is the check-in question. We have to be relatively quick because there's so many of us. But I think in the weeks to follow, we might break into 2 groups to do this part, so that we can actually have the time to practice really checking in properly. But today we've got about 45 seconds each, which is not long. And I will time, and I'll just do this when you've kind of hit your time. So we'll start today by just doing what we call popcorn style. So that's just when you're like, yep, ready to go, just raise your hand and I'll call you in. And I'm really tired of talking, so I won't begin. Does anyone? Yes, great. Jenny, go ahead.
I'm Jenny. I am a software engineer at MetaMask. Did Team Foundations with Joshua before the new year, and so my intention is we lost a little bit of steam with the consensus 1.0 to 2.0, I think. That was happening as our class was ending, and I'm hoping to bring that back for the team and do some work on myself. Who wants to go next? Thomas.
Hi, I'm Tom. I am a product manager on Academy. My intention is to utilize the techniques in this class along with some of the alumni from this class that are currently on my team to continue to decentralize decision-making within my team and to promote self-organization as a continued practice. Brianna.
Hi, I'm Brianna. I look after APAC marketing as a part of the Catalyst team. For this in particular, I think being quite remote geographically means that self-organization is super important. The majority of our team are based in the US, so just looking for some tips and skills to kind of help along that journey. And also I come from a super hierarchical organization in my past, so just learning new ways of working will be really positive. Who wants to go next? Madeline.
I'm Madeline. I'm a technical writer with Pegasus. My intention is just, so some of my teammates have done this training and they all spoke very highly of it. Like Brianna, I've always worked in hierarchical places and I tend to fall into wanting to, like, I don't know, tell people what to do when I think things aren't going the way they should. So I think having some skills to maybe help break that a bit more would be great. I think possibly too, because people have come from hierarchy places, sometimes people just fall into accepting that exception. Like, yeah, if you tell them what to do, they do it in some cases, and then it kind of perpetuates the thing. So looking forward to it. Who's next? I can't see any hands raised, so Susan might have to click on someone. Sorry, yes, I can see the Zoom hands raised. So, but I could also see Horatio's hand raised. So let's go with Horatio.
Hi, I'm Horacio. I'm in the site change team in Pegasus. And my intention is to, well, use the chance of working consensus to learn more about how self-organization can work and can change things.
Great, thanks, Horatio. Brett, take it away.
Cool, thanks. I'm Brett, product marketing within Catalyst. And my intention for this training, I've been reading the book Reinventing Organizations right now, and so really intrigued about a new model for organizations. And so wanting to really put it into practice and learn about how to put it into practice, both within consensus with my team and how do we be more effective in this type of organizational model, but then also as a personal growth factor. So in the future, being able to take this and bring it to other organizations as well.
Awesome, thanks, Brett. Great book. I'll let you guys continue this beautiful flow that Jenny started with seeing who's next after when you finish your check-in. So Brett, I'll ask you to figure out who's next.
Sure. Priyanka.
Hi, I'm Priyanka. I'm the Australia community lead. Please don't mind the background music. I'm at a cafe. I'm really keen for this training because I have previously worked on my own, but not across a decentralized organization. And as I've only just started about a month or two ago, I think now is the perfect time for me to really get on board with this training, as well as with 2.0. And I picked Prima.
Hi, thank you. Hey, everybody. My name is Karima. I'm based in DC. I'm DC community lead. And the reason why I chose to take this course, I really didn't realize until I looked into the documents and it said something about being present at meetings. And I really know that I cannot be present at meetings. So that's something I really want to work on because I don't want to always be doing 8,000 things at once. You don't really get the full experience. So yeah, that's one of the things I want to pull from this. And I picked Sean next.
Hey guys, my name is Sean. I'm from the Academy team as a trainer for Asia Pacific, and I was provided the book Reinventing Organization about 4 months ago and found some time over Christmas just to sit back and absorb it, and it just blows my mind of some of the concepts and just wanted to learn more. Next.
I think Jim is also indicating his hands up.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead, Jim. Thanks, Sean.
Oh, was that Jim? Okay. Hi, everyone. Jim Jagelski here. I am your Mesh's open source chef or guru, whichever name or adjective you want to use. And I'm a firm believer that you can always learn more, that you can always round out whatever level of expertise and knowledge that you have. And so I'm really, really excited about getting everyone else's viewpoints and worldviews about self-organization. And I pick Eileen.
Hi, everyone. Great to meet you all. I am with the Infera team based in LA. And my intention for joining this is I feel like Infera is a pretty relatively efficient group, but I think that learning more micro practices and implementing be really helpful as well. And also, I guess, reprogramming myself to think in other forms of hierarchy. Next, Kristen.
Hello. So I'm Kristen. I'm the SF Hub Manager. And my intention in joining this was to learn more about collaborating in non-hierarchical environments. I come from a product and design background and did lots and lots of collaboration on that level. But from an operational perspective, I've never worked in a company that's non-hierarchical, and it has some really interesting implications. So I'm excited about learning new tools and actually getting a place to practice them. And I pick, I can't see names. There's a gentleman who's smiling and has a crew cup with dark hair. Yep, you're waving.
I'm
That's me.
gonna guess
I'm
this is
Frank.
right.
Yeah, I'm Frank. Um, I am a support engineer for a customer success team. I'm based off in Boston. I was hoping to join this group because this will be my first self-organization company, or a company that is highly focused on self-organizing. And so I'm trying to break away from that hierarchical uh, organizations and trying to learn what different key aspects can I bring back to my team about self-organizing. And whoever wants to go next, Akila.
Hi everyone, my name is Akila. I'm an engineer on Pegasus working on Ethereum 2.0 based in Brooklyn, and I joined this class because I actually hate hierarchy. I left Google for that reason. And I love, I'm really self-motivated, so self-organizing really works for my lifestyle, but I would like to learn more tips on how I can be more productive throughout the day. And that's it. Who wants to go next? Is anyone raising their hand? Oh, Calvin?
Hi everyone, thanks. My name is Kelvin. I work here in Sydney. I manage content and social for Catalyst. My intention of joining this course is, before this, I was working at a bank that tried to do some self-organization, but because it was a bank, it basically lit itself on fire. So I just want to see it done properly and right in a place that encourages that sort of skill set. So that's why I'm here.
Great, thank you. Is that everyone except for?
I think Pooja, Pooja, I know that you're in the middle of the night, so we'll excuse you for turning on your video, but can you check in verbally?
I think we can come back to that later. Can you state your intention, Mary and Susan? Is it checking? I will too. Mary, go ahead.
Sure. I think my intention for this whole course is to just open my mind and my heart, and to really, really extend as much empathy as I can to this group. I love fellow self-learners, and so that's my intention, to hold all of myself for you.
My intention is to have fun. This is probably, I don't know, Kate, but this is maybe I don't know. We've run a lot of these courses and everyone is magic. And so I always come in with the intention of just trying to hold that vibe of, this is going to be hard, and some days you're going to hate it, and some days you're going to think, oh my God, why did I ever get myself into this? Because I'm challenging everything I ever believed about myself. But other days you're just going to be breathing out and relaxing and say, oh, wow, I never thought about that. That's my intention.
Great, thanks, Susan. I'm glad you're bringing in the fun, because I often play that role. But this time my intention is to be very well organized, very well prepared, and to be very present and available as much as possible for all of you in those office hours, in this call, and with any questions and conversations we may want to continue after this training. So thank you all. And looking forward in subsequent check-ins to going into some other areas, and maybe we'll make them a bit smaller. Okay, so now we've got our guest coming on at 5 past the hour, and in that time till then we want to do our little brief history of SO and talk about the content for this week. So we are being very ambitious, and it won't always be this pace, this intense. It's just that this first week is both that mixture of conveying lots of information about how the training will work, getting to know you, talking about what SO is, content, and a guest. So it's a lot. Susan, do you want to kick off? Do you want me to share the slides, or?
Yeah, no, that would be great. If you just share the slide for me to keep on track. Super. So when Kate reflected that some of the feedback she's had from the cohort she's hosted is that participants are really looking to be kind of grounded in a little bit of the history of self-organizing and self-management. I'm going to give you like a brief contextual history from, I guess, my perspective, what I've learned and what I've seen and experienced. So by no means is this, completely comprehensive. If we look at how long humans have been self-organizing, from the beginning of time, right? And if those of you who have read Reinventing Organizations or are reading Reinventing Organizations, you'll recognize some of these memes around the tribe, the military, industrial revolution, organization as a machine. When I was writing this slide, the first thing that popped into my mind was kindergarten. Or just playing when we're kids, right? When we're children and we just get plonked down with another toddler, most of the time we figure out how to play together. We self-organize ourselves into what feels good, what we want, what we're interested in, what we're curious about, what we like to play with, where our energy is drawing us. And over time in life, that kind of gets beaten out of us in one way or another. But I really do believe in, from a worldview perspective, that this is like our natural inclination is to want to be in relationship with one another and organize to get work done, to learn, to have fun, and yeah, just to be in relationship. And I don't know why Siri's talking to me then. Really interesting. So if we look at it from the perspective of, I guess, evolutionary memes, like we had the tribes where there was a tribal leader and everybody was organized by the tribal leader to serve the tribal leader. Over time, the distribution of that authoritarian command and control organizational paradigm started to distribute itself through military, through the church. So one way of organizing that then could be replicated across broader geographies or broader groups of people. When the Industrial Revolution happened in the 1800s, it then provided a whole other way of looking at how we organize for work in the workplace. And that became the organization as a machine. So organization as a machine, we're all component parts or cogs in the machine. Management is there to optimize the machine for production, for throughput, for outcomes. And at the end of the day, each of us are replaceable as cogs in the machine. There's no sense of necessary ecosystem interrelation or the sense that the machine itself is a human living organism. And Taylor and scientific management is sort of the idea of measure, control, optimize that really hasn't been challenged since the beginning of the last century. And most management theory, most human resources theory is really based around the idea of management by controls. And if you really read Taylor and look at what he was optimizing for, he was optimizing for a world where, in fact, 90% of the workforce was potentially illiterate. So managers, people with that education, were the ones on the top of the pyramid making the decisions. I'm going to speed up, Kate. In the sort of 60s and 70s, we started in this sense of the human revolution, really starting to notice what we've lost and understanding in some facets, in some ways, the importance of relationships and doing things together. And our evolutionary capacity, I think, has brought us to a stage now, and the blockchain is one way of looking at this, that the technology capacity, the cognitive capacity, the distance sensitivity have brought us as humans to the point where we can actually recreate and look at the actual functional systems under which we're operating our economy. And we do that in one way through technology in the blockchain. My point is, and my premise is, that if we build that on top of an industrial scientific management based paradigm, then we're only gaining half of the opportunity that we have if we looked at it with fresh eyes. If we look at the actual examples, Ricardo Semler in the 1980s in Brazil, and what he did at Semco. Frederick Laloux finding, Frederick was an ex-McKinsey consultant that started noticing organizations around the world.
You have 1 minute to sum this up, Susan.
That were operating differently, and so he brought that to light in his book, Reinventing Organizations, and that book actually sparked something in the ecosystem. So the ecosystem itself is now starting to see its own examples in the wild. Organizations like Zappos and Hire, Avivo, Yash, even in Spiral, and now Consensus, with organizations that are actually pushing the paradigm and trying to create something new. Some of the things we need to watch out for are the shadows that are cast by cargo codification, something that keeps me up at night when I see organizations trying to create frameworks to make this happen, because they don't work. The challenge of remote first, the exponential complexity we live under, and all of the things that we talk about when we talk about self and self-management, like ego and fear.
I'm so interested in what you mean by shadows cast by cargo codification. That is a Susan Basterfield made up thing, if I ever heard one. Amazing. So thank you, Susan. We will go further into some of this later on. This is just a very brief history, but very good. Thank you, Susan. And now we'll just, we might skip some of this content next so that we can make sure we have just enough time to talk about accountability and commitments before Paul comes on. But we'll kind of, I just want to make sure that there is often some confusion that self-organization does refer to being better at our own personal time management, productivity, and efficiency, which, yes, that's an understandable interpretation of those two words put together, self-organization, and that is part of it. Self-organization, in terms of a theory of organization, is very much about moving away from a top-down pyramidal organization structure to self-managing teams. I'm going to go into this further next week. So various pillars of self-organization at the team and ecosystem level are defined by autonomous teams. Teams define how they will work. There are no descriptions or job titles often, mostly in self-organizing companies. We have instead roles and accountabilities. We have distributed decision-making with very defined processes. We have an open information flow, so less silos of conversations happening, in the shadows for people to figure out what's actually happening, in a roundabout way. So in self-organizing companies, there's a very open and transparent flow of information, right up to the level and the most kind of, I would say, radical self-organizing companies, that even the salaries are totally transparent, and the way that those salaries are granted or decided is also transparent. So we'll talk about the different kind of approaches to transparency and open flows of information as well. Another key kind of component is that conflict is, it's a part of when humans get together and hang out, and especially when they're trying to do things right at the edge of the possible. Certainly in the blockchain world is a key example of that. There will be conflict sometimes, and that can be positive. And sometimes that can be very destructive. And in a self-organizing environment, or a self-managing company especially, the conflict resolution there happens at a peer-to-peer level. And a key indicator of how we're doing in terms of that is a really well thought out conflict resolution process, and managed at the peer-to-peer level. So I don't think that's actually true right now of Consensus or in the pipeline, because I know that there is an HR or component, and that still has quite a lot of function. And there are still these are they spokes, Susan, like finances, HR, and those other organizational parts, but this is just giving you a bit of an overview of the kind of key pillars of self-organization. I just want to skip to the next slide, and then we'll make time for questions before we keep going, which is at the ecosystem or the team level. It's very clear. These are like the tools and the processes, the architecture and the scaffolding for how this thing might work. And we'll focus a bit of our time on that. But it's really important also to think about what we as individuals need to do. And I just wanted to hand over to Mary and Susan just to comment on this from your perspective. Mary, can you talk a bit about this slide according to your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my career started in 1999 in sort of IT. And if I think about my own sort of personal development and personal journey and sort of the journey of discovery that I've been on, I would say that getting my own head wrapped around what accountability means and what commitment means and what my authentic self looks like are sort of the three key things that I still, to this day, I mean, I'm 46, and these are themes that I still explore on a daily basis in terms of not just as a coach, but at the end of every day, I have a practice of reflecting on how the day went, and I sort of almost critique myself based on those criteria. You know, how did I show up? Did I say what I was going to do? Did I do it? Did I really behave authentically? And I guess one of the sort of the hardest things for me to learn in the last probably 5 years, but has helped me hugely in those three key areas, is really being open to accepting feedback and other people's feedback. And I mean really opening my heart. And once I started listening to what people were saying directly or indirectly to me, for me personally, because I'm such a driving force, I'm a complete driver. And that realization that drive in me was leaving other people behind, and I wasn't actually creating space for people to be their amazing selves. And so it's kind of taking that feedback and layering it on top of how I want to be in the world and what the authentic, good, kind self looks like. That, it's I'm still can't explain it well enough because I'm still kind of wrapping my head around it. But it's almost, for me, it's defining for myself what authentic accountability looks like, and then holding myself accountable every day for being that person.
Great. Yeah. I think we're gonna take this conversation into next week as well, and I'll send out some instructions in order for us to reflect on this a bit more in preparation for that call. But thanks for kicking us off there, Mary. So there's lots of probable conversations we could start to dig into now, and I'm seeing some good comments in the chat, which is great. And we will have a lot more time for conversations and discussions and debates usually in these calls, starting from next week. And yeah, I think that just a couple of things I'm seeing is that a clarification I want to make is we're not saying that necessarily self-organization means no hierarchy. There's the understanding of teal, which is related to the history that Susan just gave, teal organizations, which is like the evolutionary kind of journey that we are on as humans. And teal is this kind of place that you end up when you're able to consider, you know, evolutionary purpose and all those things. It's kind of like this very conscious level at a human and organization level. But we're not saying that we are striving to arrive there and then not leave, and that's the only option, is to be, you know, in this totally flat, totally emergent, totally collaborative, totally participatory mess all the time, because that is not the destination. But to be truly in self-organizing and able to be in this kind of teal paradigm means to be able to choose, to use hierarchy if that's necessary, to use a dictatorial approach if that's absolutely necessary, to use delegated decision making if that is what best serves the team or the organization in that time. So that's just a clarification I wanted to make. And I do want to continue this conversation because it's super valuable for all of us. And thanks for Jim and Brett and Susan in the chat for bringing that up. And I want to move us on 10 minutes to just talk about accountabilities and how that relates to the work of this week. Susan.
So for me, accountability is as simple as making and keeping commitments, but we're not good at that, right? And this goes to what Kate alluded to earlier, and just from one perspective is from our first day at school, for example, we're told, sit down, be quiet, listen to the teacher, they know more than you. They will tell you what to do, and you simply sit there and respond to commands. And that kind of goes through our whole life and even into the workplace, right? And the accountability that we give is not self-generated, right? We maybe have an accountability to turn up at the workplace to do our work to get a paycheck, but the actual activeness in making and keeping of commitments is not in the purview of 99% of the workers in the world today. And so without actually owning your accountability, it can't be expected that we're going to be able to understand how to be self-organizing and be mutually responsible and accountable for ourselves, for our teammates, for our community, and for our outcomes. So at the very heart of it, this is actually something that we have to learn afresh, kind of starting today.
Yeah, great. Good intro there. Thanks, Susan. So just, I want a quick show of hands, and this is not about guilting people. I just want to understand who had time to look at the reader and not necessarily do all the readings, but just scan the reader. Yeah. And if you're your screen's off, maybe you can just note in the chat. Okay, great. So do we feel like, so we kind of put out this this table around what we see as the table, 4 points around what we see as being really important in order to have accountability and commitment in teams. And that was what we call social contracts or agreements. And that's going to be the assignment for this week. And by that we mean when you're starting out in a team or on a project, how are you aligning to each other? What is the commitment that you're making as a team? And this, we call that an agreement at our community in Spiral. As Susan said, it's making the implicit explicit. So it's like, we have a lot of assumptions about what a good team will do and what we each need to play our best role in that team or that organization. But the agreement is about really drawing that out, agreeing on it, having the conversation to make sure that we actually understand what we each mean, and then writing that down somewhere or making an artifact of that agreement. At Inspire, we call them agreements, and they are the kind of commitments that you are making if you are coming into our community. And so we make our agreements. We have 9 ecosystem level agreements. So you could think about that in consensus as being mesh wide, and they're around finances. They're around decision making. They're around the board and our legal kind of needs. They're around diversity. They're around radical transparency. And so we have a process of making these agreements in a participatory way. And then when you're becoming part of our community, you are expected to kind of abide. These are like our minimum viable agreements that if you're going to be part of our ecosystem, that you need to abide by them. So they're less rules than kind of like the principles that we've kind of decided are so important that if we transgress those, that we're no longer in keeping to the mission or the reason that we're there. So that relates to, at the team level, what we call colleague letter of understanding, which is an amazing prototype that one of the more famous self-managing companies, Morningstar, kind of sees as very necessary, and that's your individual assignment. And I won't talk too much about that. Mary and Susan will both be a fan of the next point as kind of agile coaches, because this really builds on agile methodology, and that's rhythm and cadence. And what we mean by that is when are you meeting and how are you kind of making, what spaces are you utilizing to decide who's doing what work and to figure out how you're going to hold each other accountable. So we'll get you to just go and have a look at that in the reader, the little table there, and do a bit of a think about what your rhythm and cadence for your teams or spokes looks like. And that's kind of, we'll keep touching on that, and we've got some resources that we can share on that as well. The other thing, so we're going to have our guest Paul coming on in a minute, Susan, and I'll hand back to you to just, if that's okay, to introduce the concept of roles as the fourth kind of pillar and what we see as being really essential for any team to start to become accountable, and that's roles. And then we'll just make a few minutes for questions or comments before Paul comes on.
Great, thanks. So one of the first things I do, especially with smaller organizations, when I come in and they ask for help, and it's normally at the stage of just scale. So organizations maybe that are 10 or 12 people that have got a strong founder, a strong founding team, that are just reaching the level of, right, we need to grow. Do we go the normal way of putting in a middle manager to actually manage new hires and like go the traditional route? Or do we do something different? So in that case, normally the first thing that I do is ask them to experiment with the idea of roles instead of job titles. The way that I introduce this in large organizations is, right, so how many of you had a job description that came along with your employment contract? So most people would raise their hands and say yes. How many of you have looked at it since you signed your contract? Hardly anybody, right? It goes into the drawer with the contract. You never look at it alone. So the challenge is, take that job description out and put it aside, turn it over, actually write down everything you do. So the tasks that you do, the things that you're accountable for, what your deliverables are, and then turn over your job description and just compare them. In most cases, there's very little resemblance to what the job description shows and what you actually do. And this is like one part of like shifting the mind away from the expectation for what is required in the competence in a particular job description, and what is actually needed for you to do in a team might be different. So the idea that teams have a series of tasks that need to happen, and if we can be explicit about what those tasks are, those don't necessarily have to be wrapped up into what we see as a particular job role. And this goes at every single level. I do this often with executive teams, right? So the expectation is that the CEO does a certain list of tasks, but maybe that's not appropriate. And maybe the CEO title or title actually is reflecting tasks that can be done by myriad people, and maybe not even people on the executive. So the idea that we can conceptualize the work that we need to do as a series of tasks, and that we can build accountabilities and purposes around each of those tasks, look and see what the roles are. We might be in a position then to choose roles or tasks that are reflective of our particular competency or energy. We might also be able to choose roles or tasks that are a stretch goal for us. We might actually be able to decide that some of the roles in the team are roles that can be shared or can be further distributed. But the point is that we can make the accountabilities for each of those tasks hyper clear. And so how we are being held to account to actually deliver on each of the tasks or roles that we choose to embody into our working day can be very easily and transparently understood what the accountabilities of those roles are. Other questions? Was that clear? Sometimes I feel like I just use words.
Yeah, we can make some time for a bit of chat while I find Paul. Susan, if you can lead that.
So does anybody have an example of working that way in a team, or are each of you actually just doing what it says on the tin, what you were hired to do?
There's lots of having to jump in and do other things in our team because we don't quite have enough people to do everything there is to do. So there's just some roles that aren't filled. So that may be more because the roles aren't filled though, and we are covering for them rather than it's people who are better at things jumping in to do them.
I could see that your circumstance would be the perfect opportunity to come together as a team and really to sense into, are all the tasks getting done? What are the roles that need to be done? Are we committing to each other and holding each other to account to make sure that they're done in a way that we can understand and that we can equally own? And with that, it looks like Paul's joined us. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Paul.
Hello.
Welcome. Very good timing. We've been talking about roles and very briefly, so it's kind of the perfect time for your guest appearance, which we're very honoured and grateful to have you here with us. Just to kick us off, I would love a bit of a quick intro about who you are and what Percolab is.
Sure. Hello, everyone, wherever you are in the world. So I'm Paul Mercer. I'm a visual practitioner. I work for Percolab. Percolab's a co-design company based in Montreal, Brussels, and France. And we work with governments, organizations on organizational development to public consultation to using creative processes to create new things that didn't exist before. So we work a lot in social innovation.
Great, fantastic. So basically, Paul, this is week one, as I mentioned in the email, and we've done a lot. We talked about a bit of history of self-organization and our kind of definition of it. We've started to get to know each other, and we've dug into some of the content for this week, which is really around accountability. Accountability is obviously a really key component of self-organization, and particularly at the moment in this organization where our participants are from, Consensus, which is undergoing a kind of a bit of, I would say, restructuring or a bit of like a remodeling. And accountability has really come to the fore as a key word in really tough times in the blockchain world. And so how do we, figure out what we're going to do and how do we be held accountable for it in a self-organizing context? And I just wanted to talk more about the roles process that Percolab has been kind of right at the forefront of leading in terms of self-organization. How does the roles process kind of cement accountability or kind of aid that process to you?
Let me just get a pen and paper and I'm going to make it just if I get any notes. Hang on a second.
Right, yeah. Paul is an amazing graphic facilitator, and he can often make things much more easily absorbable by drawing it out. So feel free, Paul.
Thanks. So the way so Percolab kind of has been existing for about 11 years. And one of the things that we had when we started was loose accountability based around people's skills. And so roles and responsibilities are around really like people's skills and where people had energy for. So somebody will be like, I'll take on the admin, I'll take on the finances, I'll take on business development, I managed a website and things like that. And it was really based on skill and an agreement between people, and kind of like having a team meeting and check-in, and people would take actions. There wasn't kind of clear role distribution around, you know, how do we want to organize ourselves? And so we made the decision as like, this is not working for us. And it actually came because we came to a head around some financial administration systems that it's like, if we don't implement this now, there's a risk that the organization is going to fail, because it's kind of like links in with accountability and reporting issues. And so what we decided to do was we wrote up a series of, we knew we wanted to go, we were already self-organizing, but we were very loose in terms of how we self-organize. And so we wanted to put some structure around that. And so the first part of it was just identifying what were the roles that we wanted to have in the organization. And so our first part of the process was just to kind of like have like the headline names of like what the roles were. Just sort of like, you know, what you need to run an organization, from financial systems or administration to business development to legal to taking care of the website, whatever it was, you know, branding, marketing. And we identify all the roles, and we went through kind of like a similar thing to Alacrity, kind of like that guided us in a way into sort of how to write up the roles in terms of, this is the role title, these are the responsibilities, and they're not projects, they're not one-offs. And that was really clear, like when you're writing up responsibilities, the guidance that we had and then we got for ourselves was, these need to be doing action verbs. And so like, you can't just tick it off and say you've done it. It's not like produce the annual report, done, job done. It's like, you know, be steward the annual report, make sure the annual report gets down, get all the information, and you know, and it's a continue, you know, every year. It's not like you just tick it off and you can say that you've done that and then it's no longer responsible for it. And so we identified all of the roles, and then we each wrote them down, or we printed them out and put them on little bits of paper. And it was just like, as far as we had so far was just the name of the role and a little description about it. And so each one of us took sort of like where we had energy for, and basically what we understood from the business perspective already. And so we took the roles, and we decided we were going to spend over, I think it was just before Christmas, so we took some time over Christmas holiday and some leave time to write up all of the descriptions of the roles. So each person wrote up the role title, the responsibilities, and for the accountability, it was like, what's the metrics that kind of like we can use to identify whether this role is working or not. So, you know, the accountability thing we had for finances was around, does everybody feel comfortable with where the finances are in the system? Do we have access to it? How do we feel? And so there's all these accountabilities that are very clear, yes, no. But we also introduced some that were more feeling based. So like, how do we feel? And anybody could flag up and say, do you know what? I'm not comfortable at the moment, or I need this, or I need that. So it's kind of bringing not just like black and white metrics, but also emotional metrics into the play. And so we wrote down all of the roles. And then we invited all of the team round to a meeting, a role distribution meeting. And the first thing we did was just read through all of the roles, each of us, and to spend the time just kind of like understanding the roles, what's everybody written, how have they written them up, to then just kind of like spending, I think we sort of broke up into little groups and spent about half an hour just kind of like just checking that we were okay with all of the wording. So like, you know, some needed to be finished, some needed to be tweaked. Now that we could see them all and how people had written, we went through and made some modifications. And the first thing we did was put them all down, wrote down each role on an index card and put it down in the middle of the table. So we had about, I think it was about 20 roles at the time, and we wrote them all down and put them all on index cards in the middle of the table. And rather than just kind of like, okay, have a free for all, kind of like grab the roles that you want, or like distribute the roles, or like, oh, you should do that role. We're like, okay, what's a conscious way that we could do this? And so we went through each one of the roles, and we put initials, not our own, but somebody else's initials on that role, on that index card, of who we thought would be a good person to steward and hold that role. And so we just went through and we did it in silence, and we just kind of wrote initials on them, and you could see people who had written your initials on different roles. And once we'd all kind of happy with how we'd written the initials on, it gave us some clarity about what were the roles. Then the next part of it was, what are the roles that you would like to take for yourself? And so we would just self-identify 1 or 2 roles that we were able to take and we would be happy to take on ourselves. And the fact that your people had written initials on them, you knew that there was people who were already comfortable with you taking on that role, and it helped you see for yourself what others saw in you. So different kind of people put on different things, and so the first round was kind of nice and easy. It was just like people taking roles, and we would go through and see if there was any objections, for anybody taking on any of the roles. And at that particular time, there was no objections, because it was, you can see clearly people were taking either ones that got a lot of their initials on, or 1 or 2 initials on. And then we looked at the last few that were left, and kind of people would make recommendations and say, I really think you would be really good for this role. And then it would be a conversation. Why do you think I'd be good? Do I want to take that on? Okay. And then we distributed the roles. But we made it very clear when we said it, we'd only do it for 3 months. And so it wasn't taken on, this is your role. And this is the thing that we just had a role review meeting during our retreat last week, and I can give you an update on how we did that process. It was very similar, but I'll give you an update. And the nice thing about that, I lost my train of thought. Roles.
Oh, the fact that roles are not static, that
right, yeah, 3 months
cycle, yeah.
And so it was kind of like, you knew you were just going to hold that role for 3 months, so you could kind of like, get it up to a period of time, but you knew that you're not stuck. And one of the things, this is what I was going to say. So what's important is, this is not my job. So like, I have the role at the moment of financial steward, and I'm not a financial officer. I'm not trained in finances. I've never wanted to be an accountant. This is not where my career direction is going. But I understand that business is important and finance is important to run a business. And it was something that was a real learning curve for me. But I identified it when I took that role as, this is what I would like to be doing. But it's not my career development to have on. And this came up again in our role review meeting, where we've actually rewrote our roles last year and brought them down to 10 distinct roles, what it takes to be a local cell of Percolab. What are the 10 key roles that are needed to run the business? And then how do we distribute that? And we did the similar process, except this time when during our retreat, we had a lazy Susan, a really huge lazy Susan. It was about, sorry, Susan.
What is that?
That's actually a spinning table. And I'm sorry, Susan, because it's just the name of the thing and it doesn't have a better name. But when you go to typically in a Chinese restaurant, you have that big thing and it spins around in the middle and you can pass it. You don't have to pass the dishes, you just spin the thing. And so they had one because they had a huge table, and we put all the roles in the middle, and we would just basically like write down on a post-it and put it next to who we thought would be really good for that role. And then when we made proposals, we would turn the table around and just kind of like stop it in front of somebody and go, I think you'd be a really good person for this role. How would you feel about that? And then people took on the roles as they were. And so it's a way of kind of like, one of the things that's really key is roles should be continue evolving and continue moving around the organization. That's something we felt anyway within our thing, because when if you get stuck with a role, or you hold on to a role yourself too long, one of the issues is that you don't document it so well. 2, you kind of become like complacent with it, or you become like, you just kind of like find back doors. And so by having it as a sort of a distribution model allows things to kind of be new energy to come in when it's necessary to kind of like transfer and shift roles. And one of my anecdotes for when we did the first roles review meeting is I was quite animated about a particular role, which was on the social media role. And we had during our roles review, we put all of the roles up on the board and put them up on big paper and wrote down what some of the things and issues and things were. And I was like, this social media role's blocked, and it's like, and I was like, it's really annoying, it's really frustrating. Like, we haven't been tweeting, we haven't been kind of putting stuff on Facebook, we haven't been sharing anything. And somebody who just died was like, I was looking at each other, going, oh shit, who's got that role? And he's like, well, who has that role? And I put my hand up, it's me. I have that role. I know I'm blocked. I know I'm not doing what I wanted to be doing with that role. Like when I first took it, I had an idea of what it was to take on that role. And I know that I'm not. I focused on the other roles. I'm comfortable in those. But this needs to, this one needs to be picked up because it's obviously not my métier, and it's obviously too big a gap for where I am at right now. And so I put the role back in the center and said somebody else needs to take on this role. And so somebody else took it.
Did somebody else?
Somebody took it on. They're like, okay, I'm going to do it. And it's been one of those ones where it's actually been an ongoing issue about, we renamed it to the being seen role. And in Percolab, we're so busy doing our work and so busy doing good work. Actually documenting it and sharing it was something that we were so focused on our work that part of it got slipped to the point where we're actually like, this role now needs to go external. We need an expert on this who can either train us up or can actually get us to the point where we now feel comfortable better to take on this role. And that's what we did. We actually worked with an external branding coach for a period of time, and then took on somebody as a small, short contract to say, hey, could you take on this being seen role and document everything that needs to be done? And she documented all of it for us.
That's amazing, isn't it? So that just completely sparked something for me, that when we in teams are looking to recruit for new people, is to, if we were really in deep with the roles process, we could actually understand specifically what is needed and when, through that series of experimentation, with each of us actually doing part of those roles that we're identifying as something that's important. I really like the fact that you have now consolidated down to the 10 key roles that are needed in the organization. I've got two questions. One is, what happens when nobody takes a role? And then the second question is, and the reason I ask that question is, oftentimes when I do this exercise with organizations, the roles that are left on the table, it's decided that, yeah, those are nice to haves, but if there's no energy around them, maybe we park them to the next role review process and just kind of sense them that way. And then is there, what happens if in between that role review process, something else comes up that needs to be addressed?
Mm-hmm. These are really good questions. And our experience of that is, yeah, some roles do get left in the middle. And at one point, we had some change of faces last year in Percolab local team. And so it came down to 2 people holding all of the roles while newcomers came on board. And our process for onboarding is, you only take on one role, and you only take on that role once you've established your kind of like your business and you feel comfortable. We need people to be focusing on business development and developing, because we function with self-determined salaries. So we need them to focus more on their own salary and their own way of getting business in than we do on the roles. And so we kind of, identify that these are the minimum you have to do kind of roles, as in like, legal protection and finances. If you don't do legal protection, you don't do finances, then you don't have a business. Like these are the 2 key aspects of everything. And some roles are nice to have. So like the role that we've just picked back up again was the learning booster role. When you kind of like, learning booster is such an important role, but if you don't have anybody who can take it, or you're so focused elsewhere because of need, then yeah, there are certain roles that don't have that don't get picked up in the same way.
Great, thank you, Paul. I'll pass to Horatio, who has a question as well.
Well, it's as I wrote, what happens? I mean, when when the group does that process of moving from informal roles or existing roles into official roles, sorry for the noise. How frequently that doesn't work, or does that happen, that suddenly people realize that, okay, maybe this is too much for what I thought I was getting into?
Yeah, and I think it's a balance, because some roles, you know, like finances is an ongoing thing. Like, it's not like, you know, a learning booster role can come in, come out. You're kind of like, you know, it's small in terms of the impact that it has on the person's day-to-day job. You know, obviously there are people who are HR, talent management, kind of et cetera, et cetera. And so it happens where roles get put aside because of other priorities. And one of the things, this is where accountability is so important, because how do you hold each other accountable then when you are based on roles where you don't have a manager who can say, hey, I need a performance review with you, or can you step in my office? We need to have a conversation about how you're doing that. And so all of those conversations around accountability and need and desire have to be shared in the open. We have to have open conversations around that. And so, for example, you know, if somebody's not doing their job well on a particular role, then we need to have the structure and the process to be able to name that cleanly and to say, you know, what, there seems to be a blockage here, or there seems to be some issue. What, you know, what's needed as terms of the organization as a whole, as well as the individual.
How do you do that in practice, though, Paul? Because I can see how you can do that in a project when somebody's not meeting deliverables in a project. But when somebody is holding a role that is over a 3-month period or maybe a 6-month period, how do you then? What are the mechanisms that you use to bring concerns to the fore?
So every Monday we have a team meeting. And so at any time, and a lot of times we bring that under Agile agenda. And so anybody can come with any issue that they're holding. And so as a collective responsibility, it's your responsibility. If you've got an issue with a particular role, a particular thing to raise, then each of us are responsible for bringing that issue up to a team meeting. And it might be that we don't have to wait for a role review. We could actually say, hey, this is actually a good moment now to change the role. And the other part is just kind of acknowledging that, you know, we're all humans, we're all going to make mistakes, we're all going to be like, there are going to be periods where we think we've got energy for something, but we don't. We think we have capability for something, but we don't. So how can we, what's a kind way of kind of saying that things are blocked and not being attached to the ego? And I think it helps when this is not, when, as I said before, this is not people's careers, which is very different when you're kind of like, if this is something you've been trained up for years and years and somebody's calling you out on it, it feels very different to, yeah, I kind of suck at that, you know, I'm still learning, thanks, you know, I need this additional help. And one of the things that we've been really clear of our roles are stewarding roles. And so to steward something means to hold it and to host it. And so, you know, part of that is to host each other through things, but stewarding means you're not necessarily doing everything. So, for example, for the financial caretaker of the role I have, we have a financial administrator who does the bookkeeping and the admin. And that was something we've shifted recently over the last 6 months, is to bring on someone whose day job is to do that. And we pay them as an external person. And so I'm just, as the financial caretaker, it's just stewarding different things to make sure that, you know, almost like a conductor, to bring it on board and when it needs to be done, to share it with the team, to share any issues with that admin person, and to bring in all of those reports and things.
So in other words, stewarding a role means that you're responsible for the tasks happening, but it doesn't mean that you have to be the one doing them.
Exactly. And so, like, you know, documentation is one of our roles. System, we called it organization or systemizer. So like making sure the handbook is up to date. Well, it's not that person's job to go and write up the whole handbook for Percolab. But that person as a steward of that role would be to say, hey, we need to have a team meeting. I'm going to host that meeting, or I'm going to host that next team meeting. We're going to do it all on the handbook. It's a timely moment for us to update it. So can we make sure, and everybody then is just inputting the stuff into the handbook or updating it or whatever. But they're not responsible to just go, oh, I've got to go and do the handbook and disappearing for 3 weeks to go and write up the handbook. There's something very different. So stewarding of facilitating that role to make sure things are being done in a timely and useful manner.
Great. I think that's a very good and important clarification. I want to pass to you, Brett, to ask your question around consensus.
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the biggest opportunities, but also sometimes can be a challenge at consensus, is the ability to basically split your time and to work across multiple different teams, multiple different organizations. And so this roles process seems relatively in-depth, involved, right? And I can see it working very well when you're part of a core team and you're continually kind of working on these roles. What are some of the considerations of this type of format in an organization where you can work across multiple different teams or multiple different roles? So I guess that's the question.
And so our experience in Percolab is we are an international team as well as local roles. So we have international roles as well, which are done at distance. One of the things that's really helped us with that is we have our monthly stewarding gathering of Percolab, where it's really kind of like sharing, and it's kind of like, if we all kind of see Percolab as a fractal. So like what we do in our local team is the same as we do on our international team. And so like we hold each other accountable for those roles, but in a wider context with stewards from other places who are holding on those roles or holding those roles. And the same again, those roles could be passed. So, we don't need to have 3 people caretaking the website, for example, of Percolab. We need one person internationally stewarding that and doing it. And the other thing is just kind of like our open documentation. So making sure that everybody has within the organization full access to all of the role documentation. And we use Slack, as our thing. And our Slack channels are named under the roles. So whether they're local or international. And that's where the conversation is, so that anybody can see what's going on in that particular role based on those Slack channels. So we organized our Slack around that to help people with those conversations, especially at distance.
Thanks, Paul. Is that clear, Brett?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So Paul, it would be really cool to zoom out a bit more now in terms of what are my other questions, other points around accountability. And I just wanted to get your perspective on a key kind of question that often comes up in these trainings, and that is often associated to do with our understanding of what self-organization is. And often people come and they're like, okay, this means that in this new system, I don't have a manager telling me what to do. I have more autonomy. Self-organization means that I get to figure out what I'm going to do and then do it. And so there's this real like, yes, I get all this autonomy. I get all this freedom, which is part of it. But I wanted to get your perspective on how these two things relate because of accountability and autonomy in self-managing teams. Can we have both?
That's a really good question. So I have a lot of experience as being a manager of a team and being like, senior manager, managing managers and managing projects and managing staff. And not everybody has that experience. And so when you're in a roles distribution and self-organizing team, lots of people have different experience about and how they take on leadership. And how so like, whether that's personal leadership to be able to kind of know how much you can take on a particular project or a particular role, to being able to like know when to bring people in and have those conversations. And not everybody's at that same level. And so one of the things is to recognize that not everybody's at that level of personal leadership or self-defined leadership within a self-organizing team. You're not, as much as we say we're all co-directors or co-managers, not everybody's got the same experience or same level of kind of competence in those areas. And so it's really kind of like identifying where you are competent and where you're not and being able to share that. And the other thing then about having full autonomy and freedom, I guess you're accountable to your peers, which is very different to being accountable to a boss. When you're accountable to a boss, you kind of you're checking in with that boss regularly to make sure that what's going is in line with what's needed. The boss can kind of tell you what to do, and you're very much looking up or looking down, depending where you are in the ladder, to sort of how do you organize this and what you need to be doing. And when you're with a self-organizing structure or more organic structure, you need to be checking in with your peers. And so it's a very different kind of like way of looking at things. It's like, you need to be looking at everybody else as an equivalent or a manager with you. And so, and some will need more assistance than others in those areas.
Yeah.
And the other one was freedom. Yeah. It's, as you become, as I became a more senior manager, I had more autonomy and more freedom in myself and what came on and what I took on board. And people are not used to that, and then that can be kind of like they might need a bit of support. And so how do you kind of manage the backlog of work that needs to be done around these things, and to help people prioritize and prioritize? And so again, it's like bringing that to the team and bringing that, and actually as a team identifying these are the priorities. And it's almost like everybody becomes your manager, and you're the manager of everybody else at the same time, because you're all accountable.
Absolutely. I think I really want to touch on something that was coming through in something you raised earlier, and I do want to make sure that I'm just super interested in this, Paul, and asking my questions, but I want to make sure that to let other voices through as well. Does anyone have anything they want to ask around accountability or Percolab or self-management before I continue?
I'll ask one more question.
Okay.
So I'm wondering, how does accountability in this type of form also align with kind of incentives and structures for individuals? Because in a lot of more traditional hierarchical organizations, of course, this accountability is directly tied to like personal compensation and things like that. In a self-organizing organization, how do you tie them, if at all, and how does it motivate people?
We decided not to. So we made a clear distinction that roles are not paid. And so with our self-determined salaries, it's all based on commission and work that we do externally. And to be part of Percolab means that you take on roles, and those roles are non-paying, and that's in our contracts that we all sign. They're like social contracts, but they're formal employee contracts in itself. So they're like a way of agreeing that you know that you're taking on these roles, so you know that they're not paying. We have had a couple of examples though where when somebody's coming on onboarding, and we need them to do a role, and we know that they need to also focus elsewhere, we've actually compensated people for it. And so we've kind of like seen it as a role project and said, for this, we'll have a contract period for this deliverable, and this deliverable, and it'll be a compensation amount of this. And that's helped people who are onboarding kind of, one, means that they're not kind of like, worried about their salary, but also two, it means that they can kind of get their heads around one particular role really well, and the organization knows that that person is going to deliver on the promise, because there's a compensation with it. But beyond that, we've said compensation is not part of it.
I mean, I've got an opinion on this, and something that I've been curious about for a long time, which is, so ostensibly Consensus on the tin is a self-organized mesh, but in my experience and from what I know, probably the last 500 people that have been recruited through the people and talent team who have not necessarily been having conversations with people that they're recruiting about what the accountabilities and expectations of working in a self-organized mesh are. So I think that through a combination of that being made explicit, making the implicit explicit at the time of having the first conversation, that when you enter consensus, the expectation is that you're hired because you're a professional and you're one of the best in the world at your particular job. The expectation is that you will wear at least one other hat, which is helping to build this self-organized mesh. The way that happens within your team will vary, but to have that expectation coming in that you will be expected to do one of these roles that aren't paid, I think is one of the other things that will set this up for success.
Yeah, and this is really clear for anybody who's onboarding in Percolab. It's like this is how it works. This is all structured and it's all written down in our contract that people sign. You know, how everything works, or the key important parts, and the rest is in the handbook. But the key important parts is like, yeah, we've already made these decisions around compensation. You will not be compensated. You know? But you know, that's part of running a business. The funny thing is, I was talking to someone the other day, and it's like these 10 roles. If you are self-employed, you do these roles by yourself. Like, you know, so, and if you're in the larger the organization you are, the more distance you have from roles. You know, I'm working with a big company, like they have their HR manager to their other things. So there's like people who are paid specifically to do that. But in larger organic structures, it's like, you know, what is the role? You know, my dream is like when you have enough people doing the roles become easy and simple. They're just like, you know, when you have enough people who are cleaning up a house and everybody's clear on what they're doing, it just becomes like you turn around and the whole place is just cleaned up. You know, we did it when we left our retreat and it was just like blown away. In half an hour, we cleaned up the whole place because everyone was clear on what they were taking care of and explicit with what that was.
Yeah, I think this can be another ongoing conversation that we take onto our asynchronous channels. So thanks, Susan and Paul. I just wanted to finish this up by referring to, as something you mentioned earlier, and it was kind of like related to this thing we've prototyped called the self-management onion, which looks at like the different layers that we need to be thinking about when we start this practice. And obviously roles is a really great tool and process that we can use as scaffolding to start to have these processes in place. But you also mentioned, and another important part of that you've brought up a few times is the different kind of rhythms, the engagements in your rhythm and cadence that you use at Percolab in order to surface and make manifest the role, the process, like your team meetings is a time that you raise issues, and your kind of monthly stewarding call is another time and part of that practice. But also, Paul, you mentioned kind of quite an important like principle, which is that you need to always be able to address and have open communication about what's working and what's not working. And so, and the final layer of our self-management onion is this mindset and way of being, which was, you mentioned like being aware of your limitations and where you are competent and where you're not. And I wanted to kind of conclude with a question around that. A lot of self-management can be very much at this process and tools level, but I was wondering if you could leave us with any reflections on what really needs to happen at that mindset and way of being level, the kind of the work we need to do on ourselves. Is there anything you can share about your time doing this crazy new way of work around mindset and way of being for self-management?
So one thing I would like to share before I go is, and that's about side conversations when roles are not going well. And it's the first sort of indicator. So it's kind of like, hey, what's going on with da-da-da? And you're having a conversation with not the person who's doing the job, but with somebody else. And I think that's an indicator to say, hey, this needs to actually be, that conversation needs to be had in the middle. But it's a lot easier to actually just kind of bitch or complain to somebody else about somebody than to actually ask somebody a direct question. And so this is one of the things, and then it can come to a head. And we've had it just recently where it came to a head, and we actually had a little bit of team mediation and looked at a mediation process to say, okay, how do we actually kind of like, there's enough going on here to actually kind of have a mediation process. And we did a mediation process with 2 people, and we had everybody else in the team as witnesses. We could actually watch that process and understand it. So rather than going away and going and seeing a manager and an HR person, just like, what if we actually had that dialogue and that conversation in front of everybody? And we're just about to write up some processes on that, so that will be shared. We just had 2 mediators joined us for our retreat, and so we were like, "What's a practice that we can do around that?" And the other thing around mindset is, I think the key thing is like, in a flat structure, you're all responsible for all, but you can't hold all of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's too big. It's too big a pie. So like, if you're somebody who's on a real strategic level, who sees everything on the big picture, you can't have your fingers in every bit of pie on every bit of roll. And so part of it is like, what are you holding and what are you letting go of? And I think that's a key part of it. It's like, part of it is like, what are you holding, as much as like going, I've got this and I'm responsible for this. And the other of it is I'm going to trust you and I have to let go. And the two, that can be kind of scary as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are 2 really great points, and a good place for us to dive back into some other things before we end the call. So just like to say thank you so much, Paul, for joining us today, and keen to have a conversation later on about continuing this relationship. Feel free to comment, everyone, and say goodbye and thanks.
Can I just say one more thing? Thank you for everybody. And I would do myself a disservice if I did not plug Samantha's book called Going Horizontal, which I'm sure you've heard of, but I'm going to plug it anyway. And there's lots of beautiful little visuals in there that I spent hours doing. So
great. We'll put a link in for Samantha's book, Going Horizontal, which is about Perka Lab and all the processes they've created. And I'm sure you may get a few orders. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you all, and good to see some of your faces.
Bye, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Ciao. Take care.
See you.
I'm going to dive off.
Great. Okay, that was a lot of good in-depth detail on that roles process. We've got 13 minutes left. We're going to enable you to go into your teams to talk about the assignments for this week. And there's a tiny bit of detail on them in the reader, but I'll just share my screen to give you a little bit more, and we'll share these slides, of course, as well, especially around this team assignment. So you'll be going into your teams and you'll be figuring out, how you're going to do the work. And the first kind of task when we form teams is to make a social contract. You'll be doing this with your teams for at least, you'll be together for at least 3 weeks of this course. And you don't have to tick off each of these bullet points. That's a key instruction. Think about what you think a social contract should be in order for you to set out how you want to be held to account as a team within SO101. And I invite you to be creative here. You can, of course, do a nice Google document that sets everything out. You could do a video recording. We've had teams in the past do kind of like around the world, kind of iterating or saying their social contract in a Zoom recording and being quite playful and creative, or make some kind of interesting graphic like this. So it's up to you, and we invite you to go kind of further as much as possible than the basic instructions we've set out here and in the reader. Any questions on that? I'll just scan across. I can see you all. We'll jump into Teams in a minute. And just the other assignment, I'm going to ignore that first sentence. Create a... I decided to be a bit easier on you. So to create a colleague letter of understanding with the template that is available here, and you'll be able to click on that, and we'll also make it available in the Slack. And that we won't go into too much detail. This is just on you to figure out what's needed and to publish this, put this into the Google Drive, and to please, it would be great if you could have a conversation with someone else, either in your team or someone that you haven't met yet in Slack or in person about this, because these are the way that we crystallize some of the things that we're learning. So all of this will be shared with you in these slides and is available in the reader. And you can also go into your groups now and kind of figure out how you're going to work. Anything to add there, Susan?
No, I think let's do the breakouts. We'll bring you back at about 3 minutes till, so you're going to have about 6 or 7 minutes. And yeah, if you need anything, just put it in the chat. We'll be able to respond. So I'll open the rooms now.
So purpose is organizing how you're going to organize and saying hi. Oh la la. I can't believe we got through that.
We're back.
Okay, so
we're waiting for one of the other crews to come back.
Yes.
We've got a few more seconds.
Okay. When would be, is this time zone is the only kind of one that works for everyone? Is that right, Susan? Or almost?
More or less, yeah.
So I might make the office hours this time on a Thursday for 1 hour and 15 minutes. I'll put it in your calendars, and basically you can choose to turn up to those office hours Thursday, this starting at the same time. If you have questions, or you want to go further in something, or you want to discuss assignments, but yeah, particularly the office hours this week are going to be themed around a subject, which is mission. So we've kind of assumed that you have got your team mission quite well articulated. That's pretty fundamental, and we've built on that assumption. And if you don't feel like you do, I invite you to come to the office hours on Thursday to talk a bit further with me about that, as well as raising any questions or wanting to go further into some topics. So that's office hours. I'll write about it in the Slack. But we are going to check out with everyone and leave on time. And the check out is the end part to the meeting, so that you can kind of get stuff out that needs to come out. And obviously we're going to do it in very quick time. Please check out with a weather metaphor. So this can be literal or really crazy depending on how your mind works, but it might be, my checkout will be, I'm feeling really hot and humid and flustered, and that's also the weather in Sydney. There you go. I'm going to call you in, so don't be ashamed if your weather metaphor is. I'll go to Susan next.
So I'm like feeling like it's like so sunny. It's almost like sunstrike. It's like sunny but like intense.
Fantastic. Mary.
I'm feeling bright and breezy, which is actually also kind of the weather in Wellington today, so that's quite cool.
We are our environment. Okay, Karima.
I'm feeling wintry and cold. It's very snowy.
Great. Frank.
I don't have one yet.
Sorry, that was Brett. That's my New Zealand accent. You probably can't understand.
I am feeling like a cold fall day in New York when it's windy and all the wind's just rushing through the skyscrapers trying to find a place to go.
Wow, I can't believe we've done that to you. Okay, and we're so not going to make the time, damn it. Brianna.
I feel like the fog is starting to lift.
Woohoo! Thomas.
I feel like a spring day.
Great. Calvin.
I need to process this hail of information we had a couple of weeks ago.
Awesome. Sean.
I'm still in the fog, unlike Brianna.
Okay, Eileen.
It feels like a hurricane right now, but I know that the eye of the storm will subside soon enough.
So many metaphors. Jenny.
Well, it's normally raining in Seattle, but for the past 3 days we've had sun, so I'm feeling that way.
Feeling sunny. Great. Priyanka.
I'm going to join Thomas. It definitely starting to feel a bit like spring.
Great. Madeline.
I feel like a crazy windstorm with everything going places. That's not necessarily because of this, it's just the way my morning's been.
Clear. Thanks for the clarification. Akila.
I feel cold and sleepy because the sun has gone to sleep.
Okay, very little. Horatio.
Windy.
Simple. I'll go back to you, Frank. If you've got...
Yep. I'm feeling like I'm waking up from a long dark sleep.
Wow. And I'm sorry, solidity person, your name has escaped me.
It's okay, Kristen. Foggy with a chance of sunshine.
Okay, great. Is that everyone? Okay, we're 1 minute late. See you all on Friday. Thanks so much. It's going to be fun, and we're going to talk a lot more between us in the next coming calls. Bye, everyone.
Keep the convo going on Slack as well. See ya. Bye.
Lovely to meet you all.
Thank you.